Hi, and welcome back to Round the Table. I'm Ben John from Christian Concern and the Wilberforce Academy. It's delightful to be back with you again towards the end of this year with Round the Table today. As always, please do put in the comments where you're from. Do say hello, and throughout this time together, please do put in your comments, your questions. We always love hearing from you, our friends and supporters, and people part of the Christian Concern family. Delighted today to be joined by my colleague Tim Dieppe, Head of Public Policy at Christian Concern, and Derek Timms, chaplain and former businessman. Hi, Tim. Hi, Derek.
Hello.
How are you both doing today?
Derek's muted, I think, for a minute.
Easy to do.
That's
Hi,
better.
Derek.
I'm back now.
Derek, it is wonderful to have you with us today. So, Derek, you've been in a little bit of the news this week with something that's been happening to you recently. Why don't you just share a little bit about what you do and what's recently happened to you?
I trained 5 years ago. I was coming up to retirement, and I was asked by a gentleman who was doing a chaplaincy course. Well, he didn't actually ask me. He told me I needed to do this course. He said, "This is what I think God is going to ask you to do." And so I went on a 12-month training program with the Order of St. Leonard, run by David Carr. And it's in part of the course was having to write essays, etc., about chaplaincy, but also to spend time doing 120 hours of work in anywhere where there could be chaplains. And I felt God called me to go and work in a hospice, and I rang my local Marie Curie hospice. The then chaplain spoke to me. Then we came and we had an interview, and then eventually he took me on to work the 12 months during my course. So I was like doing work experience at the age of 67, 68. I suddenly realized right at the very beginning that this was where God wanted me to be, in and amongst people who are coming to the end of their lives and in many ways are seeking reassurance that what their life has achieved and that they've achieved something in their life, but also still reaching out, especially those who were still struggling with their faith. And during the first 12, 18 months, everything went very well. The then paid chaplain moved on. We had a period of no immediate paid, well, we didn't have a paid chaplain at all for 3 or 4 years, but we still went in, still saw people at Marie Curie. I've been wearing a cross on my lapel for probably the best part of 14 years. And whenever I've gone into Marie Curie, I've always worn my cross.
That's the little cross we can see on your top map.
There, that's the one.
So it's a tiny little cross, pretty small.
Yeah, and you were going in as a chaplain.
And I was going in as a chaplain.
Yeah.
So there wasn't really any reason. I had no problems whether I saw a Christian or whether I saw a non-Christian, whether it was a Muslim, Hindu, Sikh. It made no difference. I met people where they are and in whatever. And in some cases, I've had people turn around and say, "I don't want to talk to you. You're a religious chaplain." And I said, "Well, let's talk about something else then." Might have talked about football, cricket, sport. In one case, I spoke to a man because he lived not far from where my wife, my late wife, and I used to live. But all the way along the line, I was always praying to myself that these people would find God if they didn't know him already.
Yeah.
And that's how it started. And then COVID came about, and of course, like everybody else, we were all the volunteers were told to leave. Slowly, over a period of time, we started to come back in. I gave up. I did something extra at Marie Curie, which was to administer lateral flow testing to people, because it enabled me to meet with the family before they went in to see their loved ones. And although officially we weren't supposed to be talking about Christianity or anything, I'm in a room waiting for half an hour for the test to take place. So we had conversations, obviously. And then as COVID got relaxed, we started to go back in again. And then I was informed that Marie Curie were going to advertise for a chaplain to be 3 days a week working, and we would be working under the person who was going to be employed. I actually applied for the job, but I applied for the job in a situation of saying, I'll work 2 days a week for nothing and do the job. I couldn't commit to 3 days a week, but they really wanted someone with 3 days to do 3 days work. So I was, in a way, I was quite happy with that. They then employed this new chaplain. I wasn't able to go straight back in. I'd just recently had a knee replacement operation, and as such couldn't get in because of not being mobile. So she'd been working for about a month when I first turned up one Tuesday morning to do my normal rounds. She asked whether she could see me, which she did at the end of the rounds, and we chatted for half an hour. At that stage, she never told me that she was a minister of any sort. She didn't wear a dog collar, and didn't give me the impression that she had got, that she was a minister of any sort. But the very next day, I get an email from her saying that she was disturbed that I was wearing a cross, and that I shouldn't wear a cross in a hospice under the new title of spiritual care, because you should be going in to see people where they are, not where I am.
Yeah.
So
that a Methodist minister,
yeah,
disturbed that a Christian. What was your?
Well, I was still known as a Christian,
as a chaplain.
As a chaplain, because the title hadn't been changed then.
Okay.
But she.
Why did they change the title, Derek? What was that about?
Well, they're saying they want to change the title because they're saying that there are people in the world, in Marie Curie, who have a spiritual need, which may not necessarily be religious. Their spiritual need may be the fact that, for instance, as an example, which is what I gave to her when I was talking to her, I went to see one lady who I'd seen for 3 or 4 weeks some years ago, and she said, "My life is not worth, what have I achieved in my life?" And I just sat down with her and I said, "You're married, you've had 3 children, your children have all had children, those children have had children, and I said, you've now got great-grandchildren, children, grandchildren, and children, and a husband. You've achieved a lot. All those people wouldn't be there if it wasn't for you." And that's all she needed to know. And she said, I hadn't thought of life like that. And that's all she wanted to know. So the idea behind changing the title is that they say that we should be open to that type of conversation. My argument is I'm always open to that type of conversation because, yes, I do believe strongly that people who are in Marie Curie or any hospice it's possibly their last chance of knowing God if they don't know God already. And so I'm always secretly trying to get to a situation where I can bring God into the conversation. But if I can't bring the God into the situation, then I back off, because I don't feel that it is my job. But I always believe that God meets us all at the end. And I'm just praying that these people accept God for who he is.
Yeah. So there was a shift then. So you mentioned about the Methodist chaplain being disturbed about your wearing of the cross, and you've always had this willingness, as you've just unpacked, about being able to be there to provide pastoral care for anyone that was there. But there was this shift. So you were a chaplain, and now you're just spiritual care.
Yes.
What was the response generally like? How did you respond to this?
Well, I said to her that I didn't understand why my cross would upset people. One, it is so small, and in most cases, when I walk into a room, which is individual rooms, which is like a small hotel room, there's probably a good chance they don't even see the cross, and certainly initially. But I said that I meet people for where they are, and I say to them, I explained that I'm a chaplain. I'm a Church of England chaplain. We can sit and talk about religious matters if that's what you want to talk about, but we'll talk about anything. And in many cases, I've had probably as many conversations with people about abstract things rather than religious things. In Birmingham, we have there's a bus route called the Outer Circle bus route, and it goes around the outer side of Birmingham, well known in the Birmingham area. And this one lady, she and I were talking about all the different pubs there used to be in a period within the area that she travelled on that bus, and that's what I talked to her about. That, and the next time I go in, I talk to her about something else, and then eventually she starts asking me about prayer, and would I pray for her, and then I prayed for her.
Well done. Yeah.
So it's interesting. So what came to mind was a couple of years ago in the Methodists, the Methodist conference voted to permit same-sex marriages and things like that. There was also a vote. They failed to affirm the uniqueness of Christ, and explicitly had mentioned because of it would hurt chaplains in multi-faith prayer areas. So it's interesting to see how that's working itself out into ordinary life. So that there was a vote on we affirm the uniqueness of Christ, and that failed to pass. And it was citing chaplains in multi-faith environments. Please do keep your questions and comments coming in. Here's what Margaret Holohan says: I'm a Catholic and I will always wear my cross, no matter in what circumstances. It won't be dictated to. And some other comments coming in there. Michael White says, wear your cross and be proud. You are a representative of Christ. It affirms you, not those you speak to, unless they ask. So in fact, and oftentimes I guess wearing a cross is often a good conversation starter as well. Someone will ask, or they'll see the cross and it will prompt something that's there. Was this rule about no religious symbols applied equally? Was this being applied to Sikhs or Muslims?
Well, that was the question that I asked in the email that I replied back to her, and I said, what are you going to do about the Muslim lady who comes in with a burqa? And in her reply back to me, it was, that is a religious dress, so therefore she would be allowed to wear it. And I said, but as soon as she walks in to soon as she walks into that room, everyone's going to know she's a Muslim. So what's the difference between her walking in and me walking in with my cross? And also, I did question the fact that it's not compulsory that Muslim ladies have to wear the burqa. And she said, but most do. And I said, well, I mean, where I work next door to a mosque in Birmingham, the business that I own, but have sort of retired from. And I asked the imam there about the dress, and he said it's optional for men and women, but most of the men wear them when they go for prayer. But it seemed to be one rule for the cross and another rule for everybody else.
Yeah. And I guess that's maybe what we saw earlier this year. Tim, do you want to just comment and share a little bit about the Marie Curie case and maybe this tendency that we're seeing where it's Christian displays of religious symbols that are being marginalized and not others? Tim, do you want to share?
Yeah, well, Derek's the second case of somebody being discriminated against for wearing a cross that we've had this year. And I think Marie Curie was a nurse. I don't know if you know, Derek, the story, but there's a picture of her there. And a long-standing nurse, worked for many years, and just wore this little cross on her necklace. That was for her very important, a confirmation cross. She'd worn it for like 20 years with no objections. And suddenly she found objections being made to why are you wearing this cross? And the excuse was it's a health and safety risk, which is kind of an extraordinary thing to say, a tiny little cross on a necklace like that as a health and safety risk. And particularly when nurses tend to wear lanyards with all sorts of attachments in that are much bigger. There's it in comparison to the lanyard there. And if a little cross is a health safety risk, then a lanyard is much more of a health and safety risk, surely. So it's not really about health and safety. It's actually about some people finding it offensive that people are willing to openly display their Christian faith with a small little cross like that. Anyway, in the case of Marie Curie, we had a fantastic win. We went to court, and Employment Tribunal ruled that she had been discriminated against, and that it was discrimination on the basis of her faith, and that and I think she's won an apology and perhaps some compensation as well out of that. And so that's very significant and important. And Derek's case here as well, after we sort of challenged this with help from our lawyers, Derek, they apologized to you and said that was not our policy. You are allowed to wear your cross, didn't they?
They did, although they used in the letter explaining or giving me the apology a term which does worry me a little bit when they say we currently have no policy.
Right.
Does the word currently mean it is their plan to put into? I don't know. It may be me reading more into that than meets the eye.
Well, I think they'd find it very difficult with the precedent set by Marie Curie early this year to impose a policy where you discriminate against crosses and not against other religions, as you were sort of highlighting to them yourself. So I think the success and importance of cases like this is that it does cause people to realise that they can't just discriminate against Christians in this way and say that we're not allowing a cross to be worn. And of course, there was a case some years back, Mary Weeder, who you may remember, she wanted to wear a cross on her British Airways uniform.
Yes.
Was banned from wearing that. And that case went all the way up to the European Court of Human Rights, which actually ruled in her favour that it was a breach of her religious freedom human right to be Nadia Weeder, sorry, not Mary Weeder, but it's a breach of her human rights to force her to remove a little cross from her uniform. So there's very significant precedent in this, but it's quite concerning that employers are coming in different ways and saying, you should remove this cross, even for a chaplain in a hospice. Is quite shocking, really. A Methodist lead chaplain saying to another chaplain in a hospice, you shouldn't wear that tiny little cross that you're wearing right now. It's quite shocking and disturbing, really, I think.
Well, she did ask me at one of the meetings. So I had about 4 meetings with her before eventually it came to a head. And she did ask me, she did say to me at one of the meetings that I could take my cross off or put it inside my shirt. And then if I meet a Christian, put the cross back on, which I actually said would be probably more offensive to a Christian than trying to offend the non-Christian. Because if I was in that bed and I felt the person in front of me was ashamed of wearing the cross because they were frightened and then appeared, I don't know whether I'd trust them. So my attitude is, I wear the cross. If you don't like it, that's your problem. And eventually she asked me for a meeting, which ironically was 2 days after I'd just been fully immersed in the new church that I belong to, and reaffirmed my baptism in a full immersed baptism. That was on Sunday, and on the Tuesday I had this meeting with her. So on the Sunday I'd been waiting for this opportunity for years, because I knew we were going to build this baptistry, and I'd been waiting to do it in my church and to reaffirm my baptism. And on the Tuesday she was asking me to take the cross off, so that was never going to happen. I couldn't say to God one day, I'm giving my life to you, and 2 days later, I'm sorry, I'm ashamed of you. But she basically interviewed me for my job again. She asked me 9 questions, and at the end of the 9th question she said to me, well, you've answered all those questions really well. I'm really pleased. You do a fantastic job at the hospice, because everybody tells me over the last 5 years they've never had any problems with you. You're more than helpful. You will come in at odd hours if there's end of life. You are only too willing to get involved. And then she asked me question 10 was, do you adhere to the code of conduct by Marie Curie? And I said, I do. And she said, well, in that case, then you've got to take your cross off. And I said, no, I don't, because there's nothing in the code of conduct that says that I have to take the cross off. To which she said, this is where you and I disagree. And I said, well, I'm not quite sure how we can disagree on something that's not there. And then she related to a comment that was made in the code of conduct that says you should not wear anything that may upset the patient. And that's what she was saying, the cross might upset the patient. To which I said, well, I see that as wearing appropriate dress. For instance, I'm a football supporter of Aston Villa in Birmingham. I wouldn't wear an Aston Villa shirt because I might meet a Birmingham City fan. And that to me is offensive. Or a lady wearing inappropriate clothing, or even a gentleman wearing inappropriate clothing, not wearing a cross. That's not what it's about. So she then said her immediate team leader and the head of Marie Curie would agree with her. So she said, I will talk it over with them, but they will agree. And I said, well, in that case, then we're wasting our time. Here's my lanyard, and I'll walk away. And I walked away. And then Christian Concern sent me a letter, which I then copied and pasted and sent to them, which basically said, thank you very much for the meeting we had. I don't see why I can't wear my cross. Here are the 3 codes of practices. Can you point out to me where it is that it does say I can't wear them? Or wear a cross? She then replied and said she'd come back to me. And then the next email I had was from the head of Marie Curie asking me to go to a meeting, which I went to. And the first thing she did when we sat down was to apologise and said this should never have happened. And it was totally...
And that wouldn't have happened if you hadn't challenged, because who knows, this might happen in hospices across the country, we don't know. And maybe I think many times we maybe silence ourselves and just simply agree. But I guess it raises questions about the importance of the cross and the visible sign of the cross. Tim, do you sense this tendency, this trajectory? Why is it important that we speak or we push back a little bit at this sidelining, this covering up of the cross and Christian symbols.
Well, I mean, well done to Derek for standing his ground under quite intense pressure there, and also for asking for help from Christian Concern and challenging it and bringing it through. One wonders, as you say, Ben, how many people just sort of feel like they can't challenge it or back down and decide not to wear a cross or hand in their lanyard, walk away and leave it at that, from this kind of thing, and how much that is happening around society as well. But it's great that Barry A stood ground and B then challenged it as well. And the fact is that all these things can be challenged. People, workplaces and police and various others have sort of got this idea that they can censor Christianity and should censor Christianity, and the cross is somehow so offensive. Even a tiny little cross like that is so offensive that no chaplain in a hospice should wear it. And it's extraordinary. What would they do? Would they say a bishop can't come in because he can't wear a great big, what do they have, a 3-inch cross very often that bishops wear? You wouldn't be allowed into the hospice with that. It is an extraordinary thing, and even more extraordinary that there's a Methodist minister who said this as well. And it does seem to be a sort of sign of increasing intolerance for manifesting Christianity in society, whether it's through what you wear or whether it's through what you say. There does seem to be an increasing tolerance in society towards Christians and towards Christian faith in the country as a whole. And I think part of a disturbing trend, even if we win these cases, the fact is we're seeing more of these kind of cases coming up. But Christians do have rights in law, and we need to defend them and exercise those freedoms and push back so that we can establish this and people have recognized and realize what the law says.
I guess there's this push for a kind of equalization of all different religions and denying the uniqueness.
But I don't think it is equalization, is it, Ben? If they would be prepared to let a Muslim or a Sikh wear some symbol of their faith, but a Christian is singled out for a tiny little cross, you can't wear that because that might offend someone. This isn't equalization.
Yes. So I think I completely agree. There's a particular hostility towards Christianity, but I think there is a sense with which, particularly Orthodox Christianity, there's a sense with which even amongst Christians, we are, and clearly perhaps this Methodist minister, there's a sense of Christianity is one of a few options. So yes, there's a targeting of Christian symbols. I mean, I was in Church House, so as a member of General Synod. We meet in Church House in Westminster once a year, and Church House, so this is like the central office of the Church of England, and Church House has a multi-faith prayer room in it.
That is extraordinary, isn't it? That is kind of extraordinary. Well, how long has that been there for? And why would the Anglican Church bring a multi-faith thing into their own building?
Into its main, yes.
Is there a multi-faith, prayer room in the Centre of Islamic Studies or something like that, or Hindu or Sikh or anything else for that matter? It's kind of extraordinary thing to think that that's something that what a church should provide.
So I think there's this kind of downgrade towards everything is just spiritual care. Every religion is the same, and the reason why it's silencing is covering up the cross is because the cross is the center of Christianity. It's where Jesus died. It's where Jesus paid for the sins of the world. And it's through the cross that we can be reconciled to God through Christ. And actually, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And when we begin to deny the cross, we deny who Jesus is. We're denying the faith altogether.
I mean, the interesting thing about the cross is that in the new church that we've just had built in Dorridge, in Solihull, our vicar insisted every room has a cross in it. That's every room. That is, even the toilets have a cross. And the number of people that come into our centre to do activities, I haven't spoken to anyone who has been offended by the fact that we have a cross in every room. And I know it's a church building, but it is, as I said, it is in every room. And a lot of people have said, isn't it fantastic that everywhere you look in this centre, if you look on a wall, there's a cross. And
That's a good idea. I was quite surprised recently to go to a church, Derek, where there was no cross anywhere visible, or no Christian symbol visible at all. And I thought that was a mistake, really. And I think Christians, and churches and Christians shouldn't be ashamed of these symbols. They're very important symbols, and we should be allowed to display them. And it's not offensive to have a cross. It just isn't offensive, like you said, Derek. Particularly if you're a chaplain, a Christian chaplain. All you're doing is kind of displaying an aspect of your faith by showing a cross. It's crazy to say it's offensive to wear a cross. There are many other things that could be offensive. Somebody should never be offended by wearing a tiny little cross like that from a chaplain in a hospice or any other situation.
I think we'd be accused of being racist if we were offended by another religion. If we were offended that a woman was wearing a burqa, or a head,
Right.
we get accused, so.
The crazy thing about that is the fact that, as I said earlier, the factory where I own is next door to a mosque, and the imam there really respects me as a person, because he knows I pray, and he knows I go to church. We've got Christian stuff in our tray counter at work, Bibles to give out to people, and he knows I wear a cross. And he said, if only more of you Christians would wear the cross, would tell us that you pray, how much we would respect. I don't think they are the ones that are for some reason they are. We're told it's the other faiths, but it is not the other faiths. It's other people.
Well, I think quite a lot of these cases, Derek, it's actually an imaginary person, right? Because your minister was saying somebody could be offended. Nobody has actually been offended by you wearing a cross for 11 years, right? Nobody's actually been offended. And, you spoke to this, it was very interesting that the imam, supported you in that kind of way, and great that he did. But there's no actual person who's actually been offended by this. It's somebody sort of, saying, maybe somebody somewhere might be offended on the off chance that some imaginary person may one day be offended. You have to, lose your job rather than wear this tiny little cross, and the same kind of thing happened with Felix Nicole. Nobody had ever been offended. No person actually been offended by what he said. An anonymous person said maybe somebody would be offended, and the university expelled him. And it's these kind of imaginary offences that people are drumming up about Christianity, like, gosh, imagine somebody could be offended here, and they take it to extreme lengths. And this is kind of what's happened. Nobody's actually been offended.
Someone just far away who's totally unrelated and finds out about something and report. It sort of reminds me of the Richard Scott most recent case, where I think it was reported by the National Secular Society after Richard Scott had given an interview online, not because of anything a patient had really said. And I guess as well, one important thing about all of this is, most hospices were founded by Christians. A lot of charity caring for the sick, the elderly, was all pioneered by Christians. But I guess part of this is seeing the decline of Christian influence and Christian culture in this nation. I mean, there's been a lot of headlines recently regarding the recent the ONS statistics, showing that less than 50% now identify as Christians, and in some sense that's quite spiritually significant. That as the number of Christians in the UK declines, or those identifying as Christians decline, that the visibility of Christianity may well decline as well. Tim or Derek, maybe final words, maybe, I guess, on this, but what do you think as Christians we can do to be proclaiming Christ and to be unashamed about that, the visualizing of that? Tim and then Derek.
Okay, well, I think this it is a kind of moment in our national history, isn't it, where the proportion of people identifying as Christian has dropped below 50%. It's not that church attendance has declined by that much or anything like that, but still the identification is an issue, and it does show a cultural decline. And who do I blame for that? I blame the church for that. This entirely the church's responsibility. There's no one else who can blame for it. And it's about the church not speaking out. It's about the church not being bold. It's about the church not being unashamed of the gospel. And exactly this kind of thing that happened to Derek is the opposite of what we need to do. We should not be telling people not to wear a cross. We should tell people, yes, wear a cross, be unashamed about your faith, tell people about your faith and explain it, and be the kind of person that the imam sort of respects as somebody who prays and manifests their faith and takes it seriously, and wishes that there were more Christians who did that, and be the kind of person like Derek who won't back down when asked to take up a cross, and who loves ministering to people in the end of life and taking opportunity where it arises to talk about faith and share his faith with them. That's exactly the kind of people that we need, and the kind of Christianity we need to see some recovery of this.
Thank you, Tim. Derek, any final word?
On the situation there, I when I go in to see someone at the hospice, I quite often they'll say they've got no faith and they don't believe in Christ, and yet within a short period of time, they are actually asking you to pray for them. And I know that they're ill, very seriously ill. They're actually dying, probably, almost certainly. And I know they're clasping at straws. But it's interesting, at the end, they're all clasping for the same straw. And that's the fact that if there is a God, I need to know him. And I just feel that so many people in this day and age are calling themselves non-Christian. But I think more and more people are Christians than they will admit to. But it's exactly what Tim said, I think, where we don't see the evidence of it in church, and we don't always see the evidence of it in people who are Christians. But one thing I will do is that I'll never stop praying for people. And if I bump into someone in my local Sainsbury's or Tesco's or wherever, and whether I know them or not, if I'm talking to them and they want to pray, I'll pray for them, and I'll pray for them there and then. Because if people see people praying, then they know prayer works.
Great, fantastic, Derek. Well done.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Tim. Wonderful, and thank you so much, Derek. Just as I close, these verses came to mind. Romans 10 verses 13 following. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. How then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him of whom they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? And how are they to preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news. Thank you so much, Tim and Derek, for joining us today, and thank you for your faithful ministry, Derek. Keep going, keep running the good race in all that you're doing, witnessing to the love and the grace of Jesus Christ. And thank you all, viewers, for joining us. We have two exciting things. Firstly, a review of the year, the Round the Table review of the year, happening in 2 weeks' time. So do tune in for that. We're looking forward to it. It's going to be a roundup to see all that God has been doing through Christian Concern this last year, and all that's been going on in the nation. I'd also encourage you to recommend signing up to Christian Concern to get our weekly updates and weekly newsletters with prayer points, action alerts, news about what's going on in the culture. It's a wonderful way to stay informed about what's going on and stay connected to Christian Concern. And if you've enjoyed this discussion, please do click the share button and forward it on to anyone that you think would benefit from listening. Thank you for joining. Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Derek.
Thank
we
you.
look forward to seeing you
Thank
again.
you. Thank you.
Great, thanks.